Alright, chapter 10.3, second day. Distribute and rationalize are the two focus points of today. Hopefully you used your experiences last week to get a grasp on multiplying radicals. If not, you do still have a shot at success. You are going to have 2 more days, today and tomorrow, on this section in particular. I think the next section is a little bit easier to deal with as long as you don't fall behind on too much stuff. But again, you also will have a series of review days next week. So again, if this is your only weakness in terms of multiplying and distributing, then you should be okay. But if not, like I said, make sure you pick that up because we do have about 2 days of review next week. But you need to make sure you don't have to pick up everything within those review days. So try to make sure you get a solid look at what's going on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the distributive part, mainly because we saw it in another chapter. I'm just going to kind of go over a couple questions, make sure you see what happens, and give you some opportunity to kind of use some notes when you do that. Remember that when you distribute, the first meets everything there, so you'll have root 6 meeting 3 root 6, and you'll have root 6 meeting negative root 5. Don't forget that that sign has to go with it. And you'll have 2 root 5 meet 3 root 6, and you'll have 2 root 5 meet negative root 5. And so again, the only difference between this and what you should have learned in the last lesson was just that you have to do 4 instead of just 2 of them. But again, same thing happens: outside times outside, inside times inside, 3 root 36. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because that was in the last lesson. You should kind of at least have a decent idea on that. Then you have a positive times a negative. Again, make sure you watch out for that. That is a negative and a positive. Root 30. This gives us a positive 6 root 30. And then this gives us a negative 2 root 25. Now a hint, anytime you have a root times itself, it means that something's special is probably going to happen. So look at the 6 times the 6, which is 36. The square root of 36 is actually 6, which means that this ends up being 18. So 18 minus root 30 plus 6 root 30, and then square root of 25 is actually 5, which means that this actually ends up being 10. And so now when you go to simplify, you have to do your 18 minus 10, which is 8, but you also have to recognize that both of these have a root 30 in them. And just do a real quick check. 4 doesn't go, 9 doesn't go, 25 doesn't go, 49 is too big, which means this is simplified. Negative root 30 plus 6 root 30 is a positive 5 root 30 because it is 6 and negative 1 being put together. So again, that is the process that you're going to have that's new for today's work. Making sure you understand how to make everything meet appropriately. Making sure you understand how to make whatever your root is come out if you can, and then also make sure you simplify that root if necessary with what's going on. Again, the simplifying part is what's going to hurt you the most, as long as your fundamentals are there. Like I said, for some of you, I don't know if your fundamentals are in place, but if your fundamentals are in place, the only challenge you should have is the simplifying part of doing that. You also have what we call conjugates, which we're going to talk about more tomorrow. This is more what tomorrow is going to be about. And conjugates is whenever you have the same values on the inside but just a plus and a minus. I don't know if you remember what happens, but let's just look. Root 7 meets root 7, and root 7 meets negative 8, and 8 meets root 7, and 8 meets negative 8. From there, what happens is you get the square root of 49 minus 8 root 7 plus 8 root 7 minus 64. And again, trying to make sure we look at the fact that we do have a root times itself. It means that 49 actually turns into a 7 minus 8 root 7 plus 8 root 7 minus 64. And what is special about this, if you remember way back in our I don't know if it was our factoring, but it was chapter 8. When we had a negative 8 root 7 and a positive 8 root 7, negative 8 and positive 8 actually cancel out, giving us just the answer of, I believe that's negative 57 would be what we end up with. So again, that is the first part of the day. Make sure you ask any questions you have on that to try to get that under control. In all honesty, if you have not mastered your multiplication from 10.3a, I would spend more time on that after watching this video. But again, make sure you've got at least the multiplication down, because your time on that is running out quickly. The second part of this day is what we call rationalizing. Some rules for the rest of your math careers that you've learned. One of these you learned already in chapter 7. You can't have negative exponents in your final answer. Remember, if you remember, whenever we ended up with 6e to the negative third, that negative third meant I had to move the e to the bottom. Or if I had 5x to the second over y to the negative fifth, this negative fifth meant I had to move the y to the top. So again, that was one thing. The other thing you need to know and make sure you never have is a radical on the bottom of a fraction. And so that's what this is about. The question is, how do we get rid of a radical at the bottom of a fraction? And that is what we call rationalizing process. So what you do is, this is the easy version of it. So again, make sure you at least understand what's going on today, because it takes a step forward tomorrow. But what we do is you simply look at what you want to get rid of, which is the square root of 2. And we just learned that if you multiply a root by itself, it comes out. But of course, you can't just do that. So what we have to do to keep this even is put a root 2 on top, because this has the value of 1. And anything times 1 is still itself. And so what we are doing here again is just giving it a facelift. 3 times root 2 is 3 root 2. Root 2 times root 2 is root 4. But what you really learn is that root 2 times root 2 is just 2, because you took it times itself. Alright. Root 8 over root 3. If you want to rationalize, we don't like the bottom part, so we're going to multiply by root 3 on the top and bottom. This turns into square root of 24 over, again, anytime you take a root times itself, it's just going to come out. But the last thing you have to be careful of is that 24 can be broken down. I'll do this the other way just for the sake of those who seem to have an issue. So you end up with 2, 2, 2, and 3, which means that a 2 comes out and a 6 stays in. 2 root 6 over 3 would be what you end up with. Again, you have to be careful when you do this to make sure that you bring out, or that you simplify. Again, the simplification part is just what's killing people. I graded your quizzes, and in all honesty, for those of you who even got as far as to do the multiplication, the simplifying is still what caused most of your issues. 5 root 6 over 10. In this case, again, we don't care about the root up here. We don't want to get rid of the radical on the bottom. So we multiply by root 10 on the top and bottom, which gives us 5 root 60. Again, a root times itself just comes out. Root 60, I believe, can be simplified. I'll do it the other way. 4 times 15, which would be 2 root 15, which means a 2 comes out. And again, this is where your simplify comes in. 2 comes out. There's already a 5 there. So in other words, what we end up with is 10 root 15 over 10. And you will see this kind of problem on your homework, but if you don't simplify it, it will count you right. That works on the computer, not on your test. Both of these outside numbers are 10s. They can both be divided by 10, which means you end up with the answer of root 15. You simplify that. 10 divided by 10 is 1, and it would be root 15 over 1, but of course you do not need the 1, and so this would be your simplified answer. Excuse me. I would suggest that you ask about anything like that just to make sure you've got it down. Again, because it's not a lot of that on your test, but you do want to make sure that you're ready for that if it pops up. Alright, and then the last, or not the last, but the one here where we have numbers on both, you still don't care about the 2, you only really care about the 3, so what we would do here is multiply by just the root 3. Not the 2 root 3, but just the 3. And what we end up with here is 3 root 15 over 2 times, again, root 3 times 3 is 3. Which means, again, you got to be careful. That is 3 root 15 over 6. The root 15 is simplified, but again, if you look at 3 and 6, you recognize both of those can be divided by 3, and that ends up being root 15 over 2, because 3 over 6 is the same as 1/2. Remember, you don't need your 1, and your 2 comes down to the bottom. That is your final answer. Again, that is the simplifying part you have to be careful on. Beyond simplifying the radical, you also have to simplify your fractions, and again, this is where things get a little tough. Again, the good news is I'm not really going to try to kill you with that on this. I just want to make sure you have the fundamentals. For those of you doing the radicals here, remember a fractional radical can be split up and that's the reason why I gave it to you in this form. But you still need to simplify it, which means we now need to multiply by root 5 on the top and bottom. 18 times 5, I believe, is 90 over 5. 90, I know for a fact, does not have a 4, but it does have a 9 times 10. Again, that being a perfect square coming out as a 3, so it would be 3 root 10 over 5. Again, here's my suggestion as we finish this video just now. If you got the notes, that's great, but make sure if you don't know how to simplify, don't know how to multiply, that you start kind of making sure you take care of that today, because tomorrow is where everything goes really crazy. And if you don't know how to simplify as efficiently as possible, I don't mean fast, but as efficiently as possible, then you're going to have major issues with the rest of this section. So other than that, like I said, go ahead and go to your Math Excel. Let's get some practice and let's ask some questions. Good luck.